Hello, 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 everyone. Wishing you all a wonderful life, a wonderful existence, wonderful spirits, wonderful energy, wonderful angels, wonderful loved ones who have gone before, hanging around you and bringing you all the juicy and bubblicious, delicious things that make you feel good and comfortable and cozy. My name is Devanin. I'm the host of the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast, and I'm here with my homeboy Dion Brown, who is the host of the Man versus Brand podcast. We're gonna be talking to y'all about grief and life and loss and love and triumph and victory and success and really bring it full circle for you today. Dion, how are you?
I am good, man. Thank you, Devanin, for having me on your podcast. To anyone that is watching or listening to the sound of my voice, I hope that you have blessings and balance in your life. I hope that whatever you're experiencing right now is happening for your benefit. And I am really, really authentically excited to be on this podcast. So thank you for having me.
Hell fucks yeah. So I'm gonna read a little bit of snippets from your biography because your biography is so immense. Usually I can do like a summation or a run through, but you've got a lot going on. So it says, Dion, which I'm here for the having a lot going on because I'm the same way. It says Dion Brown, he's a business coach and veteran at creating and growing highly profitable business models, managing full spectrum creative programs and developing highly collaborative teams. Dion is the owner of Project Big Brand. He's going to tell us what that is in his own words, but it is the company that creates, deconstructs, or repairs business programs. Dion Brown is a media contributor and launched his podcast, Man versus Brand, to analyze the intersectionality between brand and the humane experience. Dion is based in Manhattan, where they got 6 inches of snow going on right now outside, and he sees the world as his place of business.
Yes, sir.
So, tell us what the Project Big Brand is.
Absolutely. So Project Big Brand was birthed like all of my projects and endeavors out of a need. What I found was that a lot of my clients, when I was in my sort of early 30s, when I first got to New York, o- were were businesses that functioned in meeting people, but that hadn't quite understood the landscape of digital. And so these were like restaurants, museums, galleries, real estate, a lot of industries that really focus on person to person interaction that thrived in in-person experiences didn't really understand how to translate those experiences into profit online. So I started in an online space. What I realized though is that folks wasn't really about the fact that they didn't understand it. They just didn't have the right talented people on their teams to help initiate the right sort of campaigns and programming that would help them to be successful in that space. So what I ended up doing was being a bit of a recruiter. I would go to companies, figure out what they needed, and then find really talented people that were being underserved, whether they weren't getting traction on their resumes, they didn't have the in the box credentials that seemed necessary for the role, and I would start being like a matchmaker. So I realized I had talent that really was underserved, matched with opportunities that were also being underserved. And so I figured out a way to create pairings. And so those pairings worked out with domestic talent. So like, in the US, maybe you live in San Francisco, you will consult or work for a company in New York or maybe even San Francisco. Internationally, so there's some really great folks that are working in the international space that are not necessarily being tapped into domestically because of language barrier, time barrier, whatever. And so I just really create synergies. And it's a lot of it is like therapy. It's a lot of it is coaching. A lot of it is like, what's your goals? What do you want? What do you feel is blocking you from getting there? Give me a missing persons report of someone who would make your life easier. What does an easy life look like for you? And that's just not on a personal level, it's also on an organizational level. Like, what makes your organization move easily? What makes your organization happy? What adds to the culture of your organization so that the people that make up that organization feel better about their lives at the end of the day? And so I spent a lot of time working with people, a lot of time being the bridge in communication and strategy and systems and tools and coaching a lot. And I love it.
So y'all might be wondering, what the fuck does all this business talk have to do with taboo topics and troubled times? It's because Dion's story is rooted, in grief, and in sorrow and in pain. And and like I was saying when I was reading his bio, the intersectionality between, like, business and the human experience is very, very intriguing to me. And I've never heard it said that way, or demonstrated that way. And so before we get, more onto, like, the business aspect of it and everything like that, I want you to tell us, like in your youth, what happened to set you on this course. When I was researching you, on one line that I pulled that I'm going to read was about, you said, like, from about age 9, you used every resource that you could to find, to connect and buy these brands. And you did a lot of chores and you traded everything that you could find and you hustled. So, so we have before us this, Dion Brown, who seems to be doing his thing, but it wasn't that way. So the taboo in this episode is the struggle that it took to get him here. And that's really, really, really what I want to focus on. So tell me about your childhood growing up in New York.
So I'm gonna bridge for you guys um a story. And I think in the story you'll understand kind of where I am, not only in my personal life, but also in the business life and how there is that intersectionality between brand and human experience. So I grew up in East New York and Brooklyn. East New York and Brooklyn is very similar to like the Comptons of the world, where, for a very long time, it was ungentrified. It appeared super dangerous. It was a community that was brought together by like economic conditions, right? Like we just could only afford but so much. And so we lived together. Even to this day, very many parts of the place that I grew up in it isn't quite gentrified yet. It doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of the traditional New York setting. If you want to look it up, again, it's called East New York and Brooklyn. So grew up in East New York and Brooklyn, and I grew up in the I'm an 80s baby. I grew up predominantly in the 90s. And during that time, it was like the brand explosion, right? You had like Nintendo, Sega, Timberland, the Jordan brand, NBA. You had Nike. You had all of these kind of mega brands really having a one directional conversation with Dud, right? They were just like, if you want some validity in your life, if you want to feel substantial in your life, then here is something that you can use to represent that validity. And I think it's arguable in some circles whether that was done purposefully on the part of the brand or if it was just the way that that particular kind of consumer base absorbed that information. The reality is that's what happened, right? So that meant that folks were killing for Timberlands, folks were robbing folks for 8 ball jackets, kids were fighting over Nintendo systems. It was violent and it was violent over brands. Wasn't violent over drugs, wasn't violent over turf or territory. It was violent over brands. And so when I grew up, I wanted to understand where all that violence came from. Now, add to that, both my parents, before I was the age of 12, had both passed. And both of them had passed in some sort of cultural uh, problem. I'm going to talk about. my both my parents, but very briefly. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it because I think that it could be a trigger warning and not only triggering for the group, but it could also slightly be triggering for me. So this is what I will tell you about my parents is that my mother was shot in the back as an EMT worker and thrown into a bay in New York, where her body was found later on. My dad uh, died of HIV in the 90s, where there was a treatment for it. He was a heterosexual male, but regardless, that no one thought that heterosexual males would have HIV at that time. I think the only real popular figure was like the guy from LA. I can't remember his name right now. God forbid, forgive me. But there was just like one person, and maybe Magic Johnson, and like one other rapper that everyone knew about that had it that were considered heterosexual males. And so it was truly unknown that this could really happen to a person who didn't identify in the spectrum of queerness, right? And so not only was I witnessing violence on a local level, like around me, around these brands, but I was also experiencing it in my own personal life. So not only was I interested in a curious way as to why people perpetuated this violence, but that violence had hit home for me. Now, not in the same way, it wasn't related to brands, but it was violence for violence sake. And so I wanted to understand what drove people to violence, but specifically in this social brand construct. And that informed a lot of my life. Like I focused on out of home or advertisements and brands. I focused on analytics and understanding what drove people to make brand decisions. I focus on focus groups and brand opinion of different segments of folks. Once I kind of got to the point where I was a leader in understanding brands, I then repurposed myself into ensuring that brands gave back to neighborhoods that were negatively impacted by their influence, right? So I had Adidas coming to not just to the Upper West Side, but also to the deep parts of Brooklyn in order to do giveaways. And a lot of that has been what's informed my career path because I wanted to make sure that I met my own understanding of brands with this childhood that was very much influenced by the brands and how they created, for good and for bad, an influence on the people who wanted to have a life associated with them.
Well, my deepest apologies for my gosh, for having lost both of your parents in such a, in such a way. But, thank God you're still here and, you're a living testimony to help millions of people out there. And so, would you say, did you say you research brands and everything like that? And I know you said that the turf wars and everything like that was necessarily over drugs, but do you feel like people can become addicted to brands and it becomes type of a drug?
Absolutely. I absolutely think so. I think that brands can be a physical representation of uh, a person's struggle to overcome identity issues, to overcome not fitting into social normative behavior or structures. I think that brands can allow people who feel like they are lonely or that don't have community to find community by creating these very clear and obvious physical representations. And I don't think it's just like the high end brands. I think we tend to think of like the Gucci's, the Louis, the jewelry, right? But I mean, you can even look at things like Comic Con or cosplay where people are very much putting on the brand of an anime in order to align themselves to another group of people, usually not only because they love that brand, but because they're looking for community in a very physical, upfront, clear, transparent way. And so I think that folks can be very much addicted to an association with brands like people can become addicted to surgeries, to plastic surgeries, to this sort of outward performative individuality that also harkens to trying to find community.
Mhm. Community touches on all of us, and we are so tribal, by nature, and that is just how God designed us, and you always gonna cling ourselves at it, be it happy hour, be it the soccer league, be it whatever. We're not meant to exist independently, otherwise God would have made us that way. So it's about owning that, and acknowledging that and paying attention to when you're going overboard with it, when you're not doing enough with it. When I got kicked out of Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas, I became a drug dealer, and I didn't realize that I was replacing my church community with a street life, and I was like trying to patch a wound. I didn't realize that all I did was go and try to seek the same thing somewhere else. And, my mind wasn't operating that way. But let me see. I had like a super great thought. Like I was telling you before we got on this show, I've been going through this breakup. Like I was with that guy for 4.5 years. And we're gonna talk about that episode coming up here in a couple of minutes. One of the key things that woman said was that when you're dealing through, like, that sort of grief, you just have, like, a numbness, and it's like you can't get your thoughts straight. You know? That is what I'm going, through right now, but let me just circle back to here. I wanna talk about your logo. I have a fascination with like logos and book covers and artwork and things like that because I know it says you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but damn it, why the fuck else are we making the cover if it's not to be judged? We need to get your
Sure.
attention somehow. So yours is super interesting. I see it. It's like you're sitting there and you're faceless, which is a very, very like American horror story.
Ah, my man versus brand cover art. Got it. Okay. Now, okay, we're there. Okay.
So in either hand, you have two different facial expressions going on.
Yep.
On the light, there's like a light tealish blue, kind of cerulean, if I want to get all gay about it. And then on the other side, it's like slightly more demure. And that
Yeah.
face doesn't look as happy. Your shirt, it's a red shirt that says next level. You have
Mhm.
various words in the back. On the light side, where the sun is, it says like fearless, innovative, creative, and then on the other side where the thunderclouds are, it's like failure and genius. uh, You have like fake it till you break it, but the F is slashed off, which is turns it into make it till you break it, but the R in break is flipped upside down and also reversed.
Yes.
Now, you're gonna have a logo like this, and I'm gonna need you to break it down because this clearly you trying to make a statement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up. All right. So the logos for the podcast, it's the cover art that I use, and it speaks to this phenomenon that I experienced um during COVID, right? And here's what happened. So I was leading a real estate firm that had sales in the hundreds of millions. I had hundreds of agents that reported to me. And during COVID, like I didn't have a lot of answers. I didn't have a lot of answers, but not only did I not have a lot of answers, I didn't have a lot of answers for hundreds of agents that were trying to conduct business. Because really, in COVID, a lot of people moved. They moved from apartments into homes. They moved from smaller apartments into larger apartments. A lot of people wanted backyard space. It was a lot going on. And New York is a competitive market already. So you can already imagine like just what was going on when people wanted to move. And what I realized is that I didn't have a safe space to say I didn't know. I just had to come up with answers. And I'm fine with that because I think I'm inherently one of those people that is curious by nature. I grew up at me trying to figure out stuff and figure out life and figure out the meaning behind death and all that stuff, right? And so now I'm like pretty good at problem solving and have a great group of people around me. But what it also meant is that I then went to my community right? Speaking of community, and asked them like, "Yeah, I'm going through this. Is anybody else?" And everybody was like, "Yeah." Like, this is weird. I don't have answers and people want me to, or I'm going to Zoom funerals and I don't know what to say, or I'm sick and and they want me to come to work and I don't know how to advocate for myself. And so I wanted to create a safe space for people who didn't have all the answers to not have the answers and to listen to people who also didn't have the answers, not have the answers, right? I wanted a space where like not having the answer was absolutely fine. And but what that meant is that I also had to realize that we're all wearing these hats, these masks, right? Like Devanin is a bartender. He is an advocacy for demystifying prejudices. He is online store owner. He is a podcast creator. He is a book owner, a book author, right? And all of those things are important, and all of them come with their own adjectives, their own thoughts, their own feelings. And at any given point, you get to decide which one of those masks you want to wear and occupy, which identity you want to occupy. And so in that thing, in that artwork, the smiling side, which has the sun, and the raining side, which has the sort of more demure face, they're not all positive and negative adjectives, right? You can be unhappy and genius, right? You can be effective and lost, right? And that's that sort of duality of not having all the answers, is that it's okay not to be one thing. You don't have to always be positive, just like you don't have to always be negative. You don't have to always be happy. You don't have to always be sad. You can decide to embrace the part of the journey, the part of the process that you're in. If you're grieving, you have the right to grieve. You have the right to grieve deeply. You have the right to grieve loudly. And no one can tell you what is grieve worthy or not. Like no one can say like, well, you are only in that thing for a year. It's fine. You'll be over it in a month. Or, that dog isn't a person. So why are you so upset about it? Right. You get to be who you are. And so the artwork is about creating a safe space for people to be multiple things, where the next level is on a shirt. It's not visually shown, where sometimes you're gonna fake it till you make it. Sometimes you're gonna break it till you make it. Sometimes you'll never actually make it. That's okay too, right? Sometimes you'll make it in certain things and fake it in certain things and break it in certain things, and that's okay too, right? Where sometimes you're sitting in the middle of rain and sun, and that's okay too. And so really all of it is about just being okay with where we are as people and being okay with where we are as brands, because we get to be both a person, a human, and we get to be an author, a business owner. We get to be all of those things at once, and none of those things should suffer because we want to live completely in the truth of them.
That's a damn good explanation.
I thank you.
Asked you for a breakdown and you broke it the fuck down like James Brown. Your last name Brown and you came to the Godfather of Soul.
Well, got a little next maybe, possibly.
You've earned your purple, well, it's probably every color, your fucking purple cape today.
Woo!
I know what I was gonna say before my mind lost this train of thought. And look, I don't mind, during these episodes I'm recording right now, appearing all like scatterbrained and stuff like that and weak because you know what I am right now. You know, my my people out here in the world have seen me, at my strongest, doing my best interviews, but I'm not gonna hide my weakness from anybody because that would be unrealistic. It would totally go against your logo. You know, this is not my strongest time, and I'm not complaining. I'm just letting people know what's going on because you can probably tell and hear the difference in the way I'm conducting the interview. But like the dust from the ashes, I'm gonna rise and we're gonna press forward. What I was gonna say when you were talking about the community aspect of the brands and how we identify, we need it for validation issues. This is a part of the reason why I started my clothing line my clothing store down under apparel, which specializes in lingerie, is a very like sexual store. And people say like we carry like plus size clothing. You know, it really, really does my heart like good to know that men and women who need like 3XL lingerie or boxer briefs can come there and not feel judged. They can feel included, you know, and they can feel like them as a, you know, a plus size sexual being is a totally valid thing. Um, you know, just for starters, I get all kinds of like messages from people and people we have like men's lace lingerie. You know, there's men who identify as straight enough who have like girlfriends and they like wear they would wear her lingerie because they like the cross dress or whatever. But, you know, a man's body is completely different from a woman's body. And so they really, really appreciate having like lace feminine lingerie that's cut for the male physique, for instance,
Yeah.
you know. And so there's so much like love in like clothing, you know, it's not just clothes or it's not just a brand or whatever it might be.
So to add to that, right? I think that um, I appreciate first that you bring that up because I think that there is something to performative brand association, and then something that tends to be more intimate, like let's say lingerie, right? And I think that oftentimes, right, the reason why we can perform those sort of associations, those sort of identities, is because they don't fit into the structured norm of what society thinks someone should wear, right? Blue wasn't always the color associated with boys, and pink wasn't always the color associated with girls, right? There was a time period where boys and girls, just due to economics, would wear the same clothes. Like if you look at some of our old presidents, their baby pictures, they're definitely in lace and frilly clothes. They're definitely in what would be considered female attire, right? And so it's not until society had determined that boys look better in blue and girls look better in pink. A lot of it had to do with, and sorry for the folks who didn't notice, a lot of it had to do with eye color. A lot of it had to do with eye color. What looked better with blue eyes? What looked better with brown eyes? A lot of it didn't have very much to do with gender. A lot of it had to do with babies and eye colors and hair colors and these sorts of features that typically didn't include non blonde haired, blue eyed people. So even in our understanding of color association, there is some sense that you may actually fit outside of what the norm is. I know I don't look good in like well, I look good in reds. All right. And so if you're putting me in light blue, it not work out for me. I look better in reds because that's due to my skin tone and my eye color, right? So there are certain things that work better in certain spaces. And with that conversation around identity, I think there's also one around um the feel of a person, right? Like not all men are meant to uh texturally like hard, harsh fabrics. Like there are some people that lace feels natural and individual to them. And in a way, we rob people of their humanity by stating that you fit this gender identity, therefore you should only like these type of fabrics, these type of colors, this sort of aesthetic. God bless all of the partners of the world that allow their partners to live fully and honestly in what brings that person joy. Because to be brought joy should never create consequence that is negative, right? Also, I think that to your conversation around plus size bodies or when they're negatively called fat bodies, and I'm going to extend that conversation to those in wheelchairs, those that may have some level of a syndrome, those that may be differently abled, blind, deaf, right? I think they're oftentimes robbed of a level of intimacy that moves into romantic and or sexual. I think that people rob them of the idea that these people should also exist as sexual beings. And so creating a safe space of body representation, I believe also gives credence to another person who may not experience um being outside of a body norm, who may exist in an ability norm or outside of an ability norm, right? To also say, hey, I am allowed to give myself the right to feel sexual, to feel desirable, to feel good about who I am. Right. And so I do think that brands oftentimes spin their money, their marketing in order to put you into a performance space, to outwardly make you shout, hey, I am associated with this brand. Hey, I look like this. Hey, these are my ideals. This is who I find community with. But I do think that there are also brands that allow you to be an individual and to be intimate. And those tend to not be performative in the same way for the mass majority of people. Yes, there's going to be guys that are wearing lace and putting it on social media, right? But the majority of the median of those people it's something that is a one-on-one with them. It's something that makes them feel good. It's something that allows them to identify with themselves and not with a community. And I think that's the difference. Intimate brands allow you to connect to yourself, while performative brands allow you to connect to others. And so when you're connecting to yourself and to the desires of yourself and to what makes you feel good as a person, um, it allows you to be secure and settled in yourself and happy in yourself. It doesn't matter if another person ever sees that you're associated with that brand because it's actually about you and your relationship one on one with yourself. Where a lot of performative brands, which tends to be a bit more dangerous, their job is to create a space for you to find community with a bunch of other people. And whether you can afford it, whether you should have it, whether this thing is positively influencing and adding to your life, it doesn't matter to the brand because the brand is really about you showing others that you have this level of association. Whew, that was
That's
a
the key
lot.
right there. That's the key.
That was a lot. I said a lot. Sorry, guys, if I'm rambling. My bad, man. His podcast. He does an amazing job. But I figured, wow, if I can shed light, if that helps someone that is questioning their own sense of desirability, their own sense of fitting into a social norm, man. Listen, do what feels right for you. And I promise you, the universe will allow you to be happy for respecting and representing your own wants. If those wants, in fact, don't harm anyone, and if those wants, in fact, brings you happiness. So go for it.
What you're also speaking to, Mr. Preacher, because you could have been a preacher if you wanted to. Um, you're speaking to the hypnosis effect and the subconscious manipulation that can happen with marketing and branding and stuff like that. And I always want people to be aware of why they think what they think, why they're attracted to what they're attracted to, why they go about the business of doing what they're doing. And so there's nothing wrong if you want to rock a Gucci. However, if you judge others for not having Gucci, or if something were to happen to you and you lost your job and you can no longer afford Gucci, you should not think less of yourself or anyone else. So it's a balancing act, and being not too much nor too little, but being aware. So that it's not inherently evil, but it's also not necessarily inherently good either because it's everywhere. And when you're constantly hit with marketing and it's on social media and every damn body, the celebrities and everything, that is leaving an impression upon you. Is you really, really, really got to be careful not to get caught up in it. So
So, Devin, can I do a quick book drop for folks? I'm writing a book currently. Can I give a quick book drop that feels right in this moment? Do I have your permission?
yeah, that
All
was
right,
fun.
so I'm currently writing a book called Life Dysmorphia. Trademark is being filed. No, just kidding. I already filed it. It's called Life Dysmorphia. So we understand what body dysmorphia is, where we see our bodies differently than maybe others do, and we have a negative take on our bodies and in relationship to other bodies that we see that may not necessarily represent what the mass majority views as our body. Well, I believe that there's also life dysmorphia. I think that we can sometimes judge our lives in different spaces in social, intellectual, physical, spiritual spaces and look at others and go, why don't I have that? Why am I not like that? I don't have this and everyone else does. And I think that a lot of what we're talking about speaks to this idea of life dysmorphia where we don't see ourselves clearly. And because we don't see ourselves clearly, we start to make purchasing decisions, life decisions from a place of trauma and pain and woundedness, as opposed to being empowered and seeing clearly and representing who we are fully. And so I'm working on this book. It's being co-authored with my aunt, who is like my spiritual guru. And it's something that I'm really, really excited for. So life dysmorphia. Don't know when this episode is going to drop, but guys, I promise you, this book is coming out, and I'm really, really excited about it. It breaks down things that you'll say to yourself in a mirror. A lot of it is frameworked on a mirror conversation that you have with yourself, and that mirror talking back to you as it actually sees you and not how you see yourself. And so it's based on mirror conversation. So if you've ever looked in a mirror and said, "I'm not worthy enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not a good enough friend," right? Then this book is going to be a way of the mirror and your future self or your whole self talking back to you and giving you not necessarily an answer that you are or you aren't, but giving you a perspective to think about it differently so that you can be happier and more set in your life and work toward the healing that it would take for you to embody the things that you ultimately want to be. So shameless book plug. It's coming out soon, guys. Coming out soon.
And just like Deanna saying, I speak massive healing, healing, healing over all of you nations because my God, do we need it? And so we'll be happy to get a copy of that book and have you back on to discuss it because you know I'm a book nerd. And so speaking of the intersectionality between brand and the human experience, there was a show from your podcast. So, so as Dion mentioned, he has a podcast, Man versus Brand, along with his entrepreneurial work that he does with all the businesses and things like that. And now he's about to be an author. You know, he's wearing all the faces and all the hats. So from his podcast, there was this one show entitled "What We Can Gain After Experiencing Loss," and this was conducted with a certified grief coach whose name is Nazreen Ahmed, who is a professional certified coach. That's important. Not every coach out there is certified. There are certain certifications you can get. Not saying the non-certified ones are terrible. I'm just saying that that's something I appreciate seeing. And so in this episode, Dion talks about this this company that you kept referring to as fledgling. It was suffering and striving, and you came on board, and you eventually got promoted to partner, and you really helped to take them from the shadows into the light. There was an online based business, and something happened where you no longer had it, and you went through grief to the point that you had to go to therapy. Now, I never heard anybody talk. You was talking about grief. Somebody didn't die. You didn't broke up, the dog's dead, the house and burned down, or something like that. But this is like a tie-in to business and branding and grief to the point that you had to see a therapist. And so, and you're not the only one. There's many people, you hear about successful business people losing a business deal and hurting themselves, killing themselves. People take financial and business loss hard. Speak to us about this.
So I think that oftentimes when we grieve, we grieve over the future of possibilities, right? And the future possibilities might be, I my grandmother should have been there for my wedding. My dog will no longer greet me when I walk into the door. The business that I had worked hard for is no longer operational. And I think that we have been socialized to believe that there's this hierarchy to grief, that grief is supposed to be structured and there are certain things that are at the top of the grief triangle pyramid, right? Like death of a parent or a child, and then it moves into death of a partner, then death of a sibling, then death of a friend. We've been socialized to believe that death has this hierarchy of influence in our life. and also that there is a finite time in which you should grieve, and then at some point you're supposed to get over it. What I realized though is that the loss personally, right? So I can only speak personally, guys. The loss of my parents early on created in me this very deep wound of abandonment and loss, right? And so for me, things that people would otherwise find traumatic, I tend not to, right? So my, I don't know, involved in a car accident. I'm okay. Medical emergency, I'm okay. Things that people would be like, wow, it takes a strong person to experience that. Typically okay. Um, if I experience this as a loss, it triggers in me a version of myself that is now 8 years old and powerless to do anything about it. And so for me, the need for therapy was representational. I didn't really need to solve the fact that this company went under. I needed to solve the fact that loss hit me so deeply that it was paralyzing to the other things I needed to accomplish in order to move forward. And it's something I still deal with. Like I still deal with loss very tough. I have a tough time with loss. I still deal with life occurrences where things like that happen, and I take it very much to heart. I have over empathetic feelings about people who experience loss. And so I still see the remnants of it. I just think that I've now have the tools and the skills in order to understand why I'm experiencing these feelings, what these feelings are rooted in, and understand that even though the feelings could feel deep and they could feel overwhelming, it could feel that I'm in this endless ocean of pain, of loss, that all I have to do is wade until I see a direction, and then I can swim. The other part of me thought it was either drown or swim, right? What therapy taught me is that you actually have the option to wait, to just tread water and to just look around and get some assessment of where you are and why you are there. And then move when you feel led to move, because there's in fact a clear direction for you to move in. And that clear direction may be a passage of time, it may be a circumstance that occurred, it may be a revelatory moment or dream. I don't know what that looks like for any individual person, but there's a moment where there is something beyond the fog of pain and trauma and misery. And whatever that thing is, you can decide to move in that direction, or you can decide to tread more water and wait until you see another direction that may be more suited to you. The point is that you don't have to drown or swim. And so whatever that lesson looks like, whether it's dropping out of college, whether it's losing your job, a divorce, a breakup, a loss, right? It's important that you, as the listener, as a person experiencing it, as a person who's experiencing it in relationship to someone that you know or love, that you acknowledge that not only could you be one experiencing the pain of the very circumstance that you're going through, but you could also be experiencing a remnant of a deeper, more rooted pain that this brings up for you, that this conjures for you. And so not only are you dealing with the circumstance you are today, but you are also dealing with the accumulation of other circumstances that you either did or did not deal with that that emotionally feel similar to this, right? Because our brain is nothing but chemistry and processing of emotion. That's all we have. Memory is emotion, brain thought is emotion, right? do is it important for me to study and learn, or is it not? And what emotions am I applying that to, right? Do I feel happy when I'm successful? Do I not feel happy when I'm successful? Those things start to drive the way that our brain processes information. Our brain also, in order to allow us to move forward in life, pushes things into our subconscious mind so that everything that ever happened to us that's traumatic isn't brought up every day. Could you imagine demanding waking up every day and remembering every traumatic thing that happened to you all the time. If your brain processed that way, how little you would actually get done in your life, right? And so sometimes when we talk about triggering, we're talking about our brain reaching into our subconscious mind and pulling up that circumstance that has been hiding from us and going, you remember when that happened? You remember? Look, you remember that? That was crazy, right? And our brain becomes fixated on that moment, right? That's a trigger. And so sometimes I think that we do ourselves a disservice by belittling or reducing what's currently happening to us as if there weren't other things that happened to us before. The body remembers, the brain remembers, right? It remembers trauma, it remembers joy, it remembers happiness, it remembers pain. And so, one, I would just say, guys, what I've learned is like, don't discount the past, don't discount the other things that you've been able to successfully bury, whether it's by your own conscious thought or whether your brain just did it for you because it was kind and wanted you to move forward in life. And the other is to not be afraid to not move in a direction, not to be afraid to just wait. It's not paralysis. It's just waiting for a direction to be made clear to you. And it beats oftentimes swimming or drowning as an option because you're allowing yourself the space and breath to really find out what's next for you. And the world oftentimes wants you to move on because everyone else is experiencing trauma. uh, you get to decide that you just want to sit for a second and figure out what's next for you and wade in the grief and the feelings that you're experiencing until something else comes up that allows you to move forward, not move on, just move forward.
I feel like that sounds wise and smart. I feel like it's more easily said, in a lot of cases for a lot of people, because, like in my case right now, I have like a lot of like anxiety. Like I just want to go and do something. But what you're saying is the right thing to do is to wait till things settle. But, a lot of people don't do that. We go get into, bad habits, be it drugs, alcohol, dangerous sex, or whatever the case may be, excessive spending, whatever, the case may be. We get into destructive behavior sometimes when we begin to act out when we've lost something. Although the wise thing is to sit still. I don't know. A lot of yoga, a lot of meditating, a hell of a lot of praying, and all of those things to help to settle your emotions because it's not good when we're dysfunctional still, when we're trying to function, is, we tend to make a lot of mistakes that way.
Well, I agree with you, right? But I will say this that had okay. So the first thing I think is that our brains are wired to understand again emotion, right? So hey, if from 17 divided to 24 drugs were the way that you found happiness, even if you've grown out of that, even if you heal from that, your brain still remembers that drugs is a way that you found happiness, that sex was a way that you found happiness. And so when you're now experiencing unhappy thoughts, your brain's going to go, all right, let's get him happy again. Let's get him safe, right? It may not be safe in a social context, it may not be safe in a rational context, but your brain is looking for when you felt safe, right? And so when you felt safe, might have not been yoga. And so yoga don't seem like an option for you right now. When you felt safe, might have not been reading. So reading might not be, right? I think the thing is when you're waiting is to understand, right? And to not move in a direction, but to just take an assessment of where you are, right? If if engaging in sex is something that feels like a direction for you, all I'm saying is that your options aren't to swim directly to it or to sink because you're not doing it. It's just to wait and make an informed decision for yourself, right? So if you know, hey, I'm starting to get urges to engage in promiscuous sex. Well, what can you do to mitigate some of the long-term consequences so that when you're out of this space that you're in, that you haven't caused more harm to yourself, knowing that there will become a point where you'll not have these same intense feelings of need in the same way. right? What can you do for that, right? And so your waiting is you just deciding, like, all right, well, maybe I'm going to only deal with this one person, or maybe I'm only going to deal with this one setting, or maybe I'm going to mix my drugs with my sex in this one particular, you know, way of expressing myself, right? And you may decide to go in that direction. I think the thing is that it can become dangerous. It can become dangerous to just move in a direction thoughtlessly, and then when you are now resolved of the grief and the trauma that got you there, to deal with the consequences of not thinking through the decisions you were making, right? You don't want to spend time and then wonder where your time had been spent because you were just moving directionlessly through whatever you were going through. Sometimes you need to sit back and take an assessment of where you are. Look at your life, look at what your driving factors are, and decide whether you want to do them. Listen, I can't tell someone that drugs is not the way for them to get through today in order to be a more successful them tomorrow. What I can say is that there's a higher probability that you will suffer longer term consequence and or addiction if you do. So if you're making that choice, sit for a second, decide that that choice is something that you want to make, create clear boundaries for you to move in that direction, and understand that there may come a time where that direction no longer serves you, and you need to decide what happens when it no longer serves you, because you're in an emotional space, not necessarily a life space.
Well, I'm gonna take all of that damn good advice that you just dished out and you to try to corral my ass and to keep me on, like, a good path and to keep me from making some of the bad decisions I've already started to make. So,
And we're allowed bad decisions. You know what I mean? Like sometimes in a world where like, and I'll say this in like, I don't know, trigger warning or just, whatever warning, right? Like some, if you're, if an unhealthy, if leaning into an unhealthy coping mechanism, which could be drugs or it could be food, or it could be there's a term, it could be excessive spending, right? If leaning into it, knowing that there is an out for you on the other side, if you're balancing that against harming yourself to the point that there isn't an other side, right? Then lean into the unhealthy thing and then get support for that unhealthy thing and live another day, right? Like find your support, find your love, find your network, find your community, right? That's first. That's the first thing we want to do is find support, find love, find community, find positivity. When that no longer works, the idea that you could lean into something as a temporary fix in order to alleviate the trauma of it so that you can get to a space where you can base it and then eventually find community and find support and find love for it, that definitely beats the rates of self-harm and suicide that we're seeing in the country today, where folks feel like there is no out, there is no other way. And so if someone said, I need to gamble for a couple of days because I'm feeling these thoughts of self-harm, then gamble a couple of days. Right. And I'm not saying it has to be that extreme. I'm just saying that we also have to give ourselves grace to be human, to be flawed, to have to to have had developed negative habits that we sometimes want to lean into. And that if the if the alternative is I can't live, then find a way to live until you can find the support system to give you back the life that you deserve. And a lot of people may take that and misconstrue it as me being like, do drugs or have promiscuous sex. That's not what I'm saying, folks. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that in a world where, it's drown or swim, I'm telling you to swim, not drown, until you find a support system that allows you to get to the destination you deserve to get to.
he's saying choose the lesser of your evils and whatever it takes to keep your ass alive because as my favorite Dave Koz song says, "As long as you are breathing, you can start all over again."
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So that brings us to a close here. I'm gonna go over your contact information, and then I'll give you the last word, although you've been giving us good advice. I don't know if you know it, but you counseled me through this interview. I was interviewing you, but you were counseling me, send me the bill, I'll happily pay it. So let me see here. His podcast is called Man versus Brand. His books are coming out. He'll be back on the show if he wants to talk about that. He has two websites. One is manversusbrand.com. The other one is dionbrown.com. I do want you to tell us the difference in your outro that you're about to give us here. On both of those websites, his social media is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Now, all of this information is going to go in the showy notes as it always does. So, Dion, thank you for being my pastor today. And tell us the difference between manversusbrand.com and dionbrown.com, and then you can give the world whatever advice you would like to.
All right. So dionbrown.com is like the one space for all of my stuff. You're gonna find the Project Big Brand stuff there. You're gonna find the Man versus Brand stuff there. You're gonna find out a lot about me and like my own life journey, my coaching journey. You're gonna find out information about my past, companies that I worked with, things that I really love. I think it's a really transparent look into the cross section, the intersectionality between me as a man or a human and me as a brand. I think you'll get a really good idea of that. manversusbrand.com. We've got some merch on there that's really cool. We got all the platforms that Man versus Brand is on, and you can just listen to the episodes agnostic of any podcast platform. So if you just want to listen, I definitely have a place for you to listen there. And if you ever guys want to get in contact, you can definitely reach out to me. Let me know that you came by way of Devanin because, that builds the context for the conversation we're about to have. And I appreciate you. So for the last thing I'm going to say, it's not going to be about me, guys. What I want you to do is stop what you're doing right now. I want you to go to wherever this podcast is that you're listening to and or watching it. I want you to smash the like, smash the subscribe button, smash the join button for Sex, Drugs, and Jesus, wherever you're listening to this app, and show some love. Like, shoot a comment out. Like, as a content creator, man, sometimes I am so made to feel connected and to feel like humbled by and overwhelmed and overjoyed when people leave me comments, when people like, when people subscribe. It just it it just lets me know that the work is being received, and we know that people are listening. We know that you guys enjoy it, but there's something to just seeing that, right? To feel it is one thing, to see it is another. So if you're listening to my voice right now, pause this podcast, make sure you come back to it, and pop that Sex, Drugs, and Jesus link in, man, and make sure that you are following all the channels that it's on, that you're liking it, that you're subscribing to it, because this guy's putting out work. Not only is he putting out work, he's putting out necessary work, transparent work, work that brings about healing, work that breaks down stereotypes and traumas, and I think it's important. And so feed him like he's feeding y'all by showing that love and support. And that's me.
Well, thank you, Dion. No one's ever done that before. You sure know how to make an impression. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Listen, guys, thank you so much for having me on. I hope to come back. This guy's amazing. So make sure. And he has an episode on Man versus Brand. So check that out. It just released like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So if you like this episode, hopefully he'll place it in the show notes, the episode that he was on for our podcast, where we talk about all things related to his experience in that particular section of Christianity, and the book that he wrote, and the experience that he had in love and relationship and mentorship, and all the experiences that this man had, and what my take was on it. And so he did a lot more talking than on that episode than he did on this one. I did a lot more talking on this episode, which is, I think, the nature of guest and host. So check out his episode, man. Hope you guys enjoy this one, and blessing and balance.
Thank you all so much for taking time to listen to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. It really means everything to me. Look, if you love the show, you can find more information and resources at sexdrugsandjesus.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Feel free to reach out to me directly at devannon@sexdrugsandjesus.com and on Twitter and Facebook as well. My name is Devannon. It's been wonderful being your host today. And just remember that everything is going to be all right.